Good, people are starting to come into the room.
All right.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We'll start in a few minutes here. We'll let people come in. So this is just a little slideshow. It should run through our welcome screen, really. So I want to really let everybody know that we are doing curbside service now here at the Larkspur Library, Tuesdays through Saturday from 12 to 4. So you can put books on hold online through the catalog or just by calling us, and we'll have books ready for you to pick up when you give us a call when you let us know you're coming. Also, Rina's book is in our collection, so you should be able to put Rina's book on hold as well. So, oh, and we have someone from Alexandria, Virginia. So,
yes.
So we are recording today's event. So for some reason you get bumped off, we will post the recording later today, as long as nothing goes wrong. Today too, we're going to get to a Q&A session. Please use the Q&A box to ask your questions. We can also use the chat box if that's easier for you. But sometimes I have to scroll back and forth to that. So, and then next month we have Miranda Freeman joining us for our author event. But today we have Rina Z Neiman, right? Am I saying that correctly, Rina?
Neiman.
Okay, Neiman. Okay. So again, I'm Franklin Escobedo. I'm the Community Services Librarian here at the Larkspur Library and the City of Larkspur. So I'd like to welcome everybody for joining us today. Again, we're going to start in just a moment here, but just to go over some stuff that we are recording today's event, and it will be posted later on to the library's YouTube page. And we use the Q&A to ask your questions, and then join us next month. And we actually are starting to get a good lineup of authors. I just talked to one that we'll have in October. Thanks, Rina, for sending her my way.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so we got those coming. So keep staying tuned, and we have lots of programs going on. So we're going to stop the share screen for a moment. And then did you want to, so we're here today. This is our second author event. And this is just a way for us. We usually would do this in the library in person. And so you'd all get to meet Rina in person. You'd also be able to get a copy of her book and have it signed. But since we're living in this new COVID world, this was the best way to showcase local authors and new authors that are here in Marin County and in Larkspur. So we're lucky today to have Rina Neiman here to talk about Born Under Fire. So it's a really great book. So if you haven't read it, make sure you grab a copy and read it. It's a really good book, and we're going to talk about the book today and how she wrote it. But first, I think we're going to start off by showing the little trailer, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me show you guys the trailer.
Growing up in the suburbs of Boston, other kids' mothers wore little black dresses. My mother wore this. When I was a little girl, she sang and played the guitar, representing Israel at events around the world, usually wearing something from her collection of Yemenite, Bedouin, and Arab dresses. My mother, Shula Neiman, was born in Jerusalem in 1928. She was a sabre, the term coined for her generation. Unfortunately, she died when I was 11. Years later, when my father passed, my sisters and I went through her belongings. Under the Yemenite pantsuit that she wore to a Passover Seder in Rome in 1971 was a sketchbook. Entitled Shula Galilee, it tells the story of a trip my mother and her beloved brother took in 1947 to the Galilee. The journal was beautifully written and illustrated by Abraham, the uncle who never knew. Inside, I found an intimate portrait of my 19-year-old mother, who at one point yelled, "I'm not afraid of anything," from the bow of a boat. Their journey inspired my novel. Born Under Fire tells the story of Shula, a child prodigy pianist, coached by her Polish Jewish mother. who grows up on the Jewish settlements in British Mandate Palestine as war erupts throughout the world. Her father and uncle, Zionist pacifists from Poland, live and work with Arabs, building the road from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv. Her older brother Abraham, a member of the first Tel Aviv Flying Club, is her nearest and dearest friend. As Shula grows and the push for independence heats up, she works in an underground bullet factory, while Abraham joins the Palmach. But the girl, who is not afraid of anything, finds that as the country prepares for the inevitable war, she has lots to be afraid of. Born Under Fire brings to life the birth of Israel through the eyes of one courageous woman.
So, I mean, there's so much in this book, but let's start off with, let you introduce yourself, Rina, and then talk a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself to the world.
Well, this is my first novel. I live in the Bay Area, and I've worked in public relations and concert production, event production over the years. And like I said, this journal that I found really inspired me to write this story because, like I said, my mother passed away when I was young, and it was this journey to discover more about not only her, but myself as well. So that's what prompted me to get this going.
So, I mean, this is a novel, but there's so much of truth in the novel. And it also covers so much history, especially early history of Israel. How did you go back to, I mean, especially with the family intricacies, you know, we really start the book off as a young child, and then we see her grow in age. But there's some stuff like, you know, was this really part of your family history? Like the story with Leah and Mir, the aunt and the...
We're not hearing you very well right now.
Sorry about
there
that.
You go.
So I'm wondering about Leah and Mir, and was that a true story, or was that a part of your family history, or was that something that you added to the book?
The sisters, the mother's sisters. No, they came. There were 4 sisters that came from this town, Ripin, which is in the north of Poland on the German border, and the basic story, I don't know if you want me to tell. I mean, the sister that goes back was true. I mean, basic story is that I knew that this woman had married to an abusive husband, and at that time in 1936, seemed like an okay idea to go back to Germany. To go back to Poland. So what I found out later is that one of the other sisters actually moved into an apartment complex later, like in the 50s, and that man was living there, and she had to see him every day. Yeah.
So those are some of those little elements. Like, is this true that this happened? And I know in the acknowledgments that you thank a lot of your family members. So I was wondering if these threads were family stories that you got from your relatives. And
it's still really hard to hear.
I'm sorry. I was wondering if with all the acknowledgments, there was a part where you're thanking your aunt. So that was why I was wondering if this is where you got a lot of the background stories for this, especially in Shula's early life.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them are. Some of them are kind of based on me being a really little girl, and it seems like there's issues with the sound.
Yeah, no, I'm not really sure, and I'm still wondering if it's our connection here in the library.
Okay.
New computers, so they're not plugged in, so they're going over the Wi-Fi, and that's what I'm sort of worried about.
Okay.
And you can't fix it in the middle of a presentation.
Yeah, I totally understand. So basically, when I was really young, my father, who was a professor of Jewish theology and an archaeologist, led a series of digs. He taught at Boston College for 25 years. So we went when I was very young, probably 2.5, 3.5, 4.5. We went every year. So some of those really early images and stories that I tell are some things that maybe I experienced. And just kind of translated into, well, what would that have been like for her to experience those things. So let's say there's a scene where her brother, when they're little and they're living in Nazareth, he takes her to a cafe and she's, you know, amazed that he knows where this cafe is, and then he orders this drink for her, and you know, it's this sachlab, which is a rosewater drink, and you know, her mind is blown. And that happened to us. My mother, when I was probably 4, took us to this little cafe in the old city, and it was the same thing. I was like, how does she know where this is? And how does she know what this drink is? And because we were living in the suburbs of Boston, so. But I went to Israel and spent a couple of weeks there while I was writing this, and interviewed a lot of her friends who are still alive and family members, and brought photos and kind of talked to people. And in the end decided to go with a novel because there's so many missing pieces, because her whole immediate family is gone. And it just felt like to get what I wanted, which was this story and the feeling, was going to work well as a novel.
Okay, can you try to see the microphone switch? Is that better or is it worse?
That's really not good.
No, I think that's okay. Is that better or is that?
It's still low. It started off really well. I don't know what changed.
Yeah, I'm not really sure either. So, so the next part is the novel. Really, you have a soundtrack to the whole novel.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated the QR codes in the thing. That was a novel thing to do, but how did you go about picking the soundtrack that sort of accompanies Shula's upbringing and throughout the whole book?
Well, music was very important to my mother. And obviously she was a pianist, and that is true. And then she switched to guitar when when I was growing up. And I had put a lot of music in, and someone who was looking at early drafts of it said, oh, it'd be really cool if you could hear this stuff. And she had seen a book where there was a special app and you could scan something on the page. And I thought, well, I can't really do that. I can't make an app, but a QR code I can do. And I just love the idea that I can say she played Hava Nagila on the recorder, and then you can link to someone playing Hava Nagila on the recorder. And then I knew my sister had reminded me that she really liked Rachmaninoff, and I was looking for kind of a thread in terms of the music and her playing, and that worked really well. I think the pieces that I was able to choose reflected where she would have been, or where someone who was in that world, concert pianist, would have been. So I think it's really fun. I mean, and then I started linking to videos of certain historical events, and you know, you can amazingly hear the Palestine Philharmonic in 1936 playing. So it's amazing what's out there.
Well, too, it adds to the element of history too. Some of the songs that you found that were sung by singers that were popular songs that I really liked. For me, who doesn't know much about Israel's history, it was really an eye opener. But I just loved you were able to find those songs and singers that were just sort of exposing us to new music. I even love the practice stuff that was, you know, there was a part in the book where she's practicing over and over again, and you included what that practice would be. And I just thought that was really cool for people who love music to hear that, or people who don't know what the music is like. It's a chance to discover that music. But I really love that part. And you're right, there were two films that you included in there that really, you know, they're really important moments of Israel's history. It's the UN's that committee that votes to have the state of Israel born. And I thought that was really cool to have in the book. I mean, it's a little part of the book because the family's there listening to it on the radio, but for us to now reading along can stop and listen along as well, just as the family was. That was a great addition to this. So
thank you.
yeah, I mean, I still love the whole, I mean, I had a friend who went to kibbutz when I was younger, and I just thought the idea of having and I guess it was true. They had this shell making factory where they were making bullets underground. And when I think when I saw the little videos after reading the book, that was true. That this is a place where they were really making, and you had to do it in secret because you're trying to arm an army.
An underground army.
Really got a lot of life.
Yeah. In terms of
I
that,
think
we knew she had told us. I mean, we didn't know much, but we knew she had told us she worked in some kind of a munitions factory, and that she hated potatoes because that's all they had to eat. That's pretty much what I knew. And then I started researching, and I actually went to visit this museum, Machon Ayalon, which was one. I think there were 3 different ones, but that was kind of the major one. Not sure if she was actually at that one or not, but that's where the character Shula ends up, because it's an amazing story.
So I sort of lost my okay. So one of the other things too that the book dealt with, and I think a lot of people forget, is immigration, and the immigration of I mean, and it's a heartbreaking thing to see, is that that a lot of European Jews were fleeing during World War II, beginning and afterwards, and to see that they were being sort of well, they were not sort of, but they were denied entry for a long time. And I thought that having the one girl, I know I forgot her name, who stays with Shula,
Naomi,
who got away. Did you do a lot of research into finding that history of the treatment of the refugees?
Yeah, I did a lot of research on everything. But I mean, this was what was going on. I mean, it had been this small little settlement, and then in the 30s, that just, because there were so many European Jews that had to leave because they were losing jobs, it just became this deluge of people, and the area was not prepared for that. I don't know if they ever would have been, but yeah, I mean, there were not a lot of places for Jews in Europe to go to. I mean, because then there were quotas everywhere, so you couldn't get in anywhere. But I think that whole thing about the refugees is what drove that feeling that we have to take care of people. Look, no one's going to take care of us. And at that time, that was what was going on.
So now I'm sort of lost for what I should ask next. There's, I mean, you do cover a lot of ground in here. There's the the impact of World War II. There's also the war that the Arab states declare after Israel is founded, and Abraham's and her father, Shula's father, and I'm sorry, I forgot the name again. There's these 2 ongoing tragedies of, right after the birth of a nation, that they're facing, a war, and a brother who's been, wants to be a pilot, and then a father who, something nowadays gets, you wouldn't think someone would pass away from malaria, but that was still a very common thing to happen in those days.
Yeah, and a lot of malaria in the swamps. Yeah. That story of her father and her brother and how they died is what happened. I think for my mother, that made being in Israel at times hard, because there were so many memories, and it was just very sad. And there's
So,
some questions if you want to look at the chat. I see a bunch of.
So yeah, does somebody have a question? So if you want to put a question in the book, someone asked, is it an audio book yet?
It is not an audiobook yet. I'm hoping to do that soon. But I self-published, so this is all me doing it on my own. So we'll get there.
So, and then somebody asked, how did your mom die?
My mother had breast cancer, and we had spent a year in Israel in 73, 74. She was diagnosed when we got back, and she passed away about a year later. And this was before mammograms, you know, infancy of chemotherapy and early on.
And then someone's asked, can you talk about how the book started for you?
Well, in two ways. The book started, I found that journal, but before that, my mother had this huge collection of Yemenite, Bedouin, and Arab dresses. And that was what she performed in. And so, you know, they were kind of in storage. And when my father passed away, we took everything out, and I took photographs, put up a little website, and then someone contacted me and said, oh, I'm an expert on Yemenite embroidery, and I want to do a story on this collection. And I was like, okay. So she actually came out, she got a grant and came out and photographed everything. And it just started making me feel like there was something more there. They weren't just my mother's dresses, but they meant something because she collected everything. I mean, to her, she could wear an Arab dress or a Yemenite dress, even though she herself was, you know, she was born there, but she was a Polish Jew. But for that first generation, the sabras, it had a whole different meaning because they didn't have, she knew nothing about Poland. Her place where she was born was in Israel or in Palestine at the time, and that whole generation started creating, they were the first to speak this language as their native tongue. It wasn't just the religious or the studying language. And that whole idea of what did that generation and how did this culture start? That's what started to really interest me. And then when I found that journal, actually the woman who had done this, the photographs started asking me more questions. And so I went and I pulled out the box of my mother's papers and I found this journal. And then that just to me was just like, oh, there's the story. I have this whole story about this brother and the sister, and I didn't even know. And this is my mother. And this wonderful thing. And it was very much a Sabra story. And so I actually started just to try to write about that trip. And I was like, oh, that's not really enough. And it became, you know, half a chapter instead of the whole book. So that's how that came about.
And even the word sabra, right? There's a meaning to the word sabra. I think you talk about it in the book, and you. Yeah,
it's sabra is the fruit of the cactus tree, and it was the name given to this first generation of native-born Hebrew speakers, and it stands for it's prickly on the outside, but sweet on the inside. So you have to kind of, you know, Israelis can be a little prickly, but very warm and generous and open as a culture. But one interesting thing about the sabra that I found in my research is that it is actually not native to the Middle East. It was brought over from Mexico by the Spanish about 500 years ago. So when you talk about where's culture and we're all mixed up.
Well, and I think that is too, is for Israel too, it's a country where everybody who came back from other places and parts of the world brought those little cultures back to them too. So someone's asking, can you discuss in further detail a trip to Galilee and the sketches your mom made on the trip of your mother jumping into the boat and leading your brother away from the shore?
So this was this book that my mother's brother Abraham drew and wrote, and it's all in verse, and it's called Trip to the Galilee. And they went on a trip in July of 1947 to the Galilee, and they went from it's a hike there. You go from the sea to the sea, which is from the Sea of Galilee to the Mediterranean Sea. So you cross the the country. And it was just this amazing, you know, my mother's 19 and her brother's 21, and they're off on this adventure. And at one point, you know, they go to a kosher winery and she gets drunk. And here I am reading this and going, what? And she's not afraid of anything. And she is, you know, she's complaining all the time. And it was just a really wonderful thing and such a gift to be able to find and do something with.
Well, too, and Abraham's able to catch a moment, a true moment of their life in this journal that has now inspired a novel, that it's something that can be passed down in your family. It's a wonderful treasure. So
it was really something. And, you know, he died so young, we didn't, and my mother didn't talk about him that much. We just knew this was incredibly painful.
Mm-hmm.
So.
We're wondering if anybody else has any other questions.
I see some in the chat.
So we see that someone asked when we can ask questions. Now is a good time if you want to ask a question. The other ones are about my microphone. Sorry again, Mike. Now I'm worried for tomorrow's event too, because I figured out what's wrong with our microphone. So. I mean, did you want to do a reading out of the book, or
I was going to do. If you want, I could do the Bullet Factory reading.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So this is takes place in a place called Machon Ayalon, which is in Rehovot, which is outside of Tel Aviv, and it's February of 1948. Shula waits by the kibbutz's laundry building like she has every morning for the last 2 weeks. Young men and women slowly join her, all dressed for the heat in short pants and shirts. The scent of fresh baked bread wafts over from the bakery across the way. Long rows of white shirts on clotheslines connecting the two structures like tentacles. The supervisor approaches, his black hair short and neat. He breaks apart a fresh loaf of bread and distributes it among them. Boker Tov, good morning, he says. Some British soldiers are here with shirts to launder. Let's walk over there until they leave. Walking towards a row of apple trees, she breathes in the crisp morning air, closes her eyes and lets the sun shine on her face. It feels so good, so right. She wants to hold on to this feeling, the warmth of the sun on her skin, the sounds of the birds chirping in the trees, the smell of the fresh grass. She pulls a branch to her nose and sniffs the light pink blossom. Doesn't really smell, right? The supervisor says. No, not really, but it looks nice, she answers. He plucks the flower from the tree and hands it to Shula. Keep it with you today and maybe things won't seem that bad. A few minutes later, the British soldiers U-turn in a cloud of dust and drive off in their Jeep. Looks like we can go to work now, he says, and they head back to the laundry. Inside the cement block structure, 3 large round washing machines churn. The sound of metal scraping metal is deafening. Steam erupts from a huge boiler. A woman at a large sink rubs a shirt back and forth against a soapy metal washboard. The foreman, a big, strong man with a shock of thick white hair, nods as they file into the building. He wears a faded blue work shirt that pulls against his barrel chest. A cigarette dangles from his mouth. Even in the middle of the desert, the Brits walk around like they've just left a fancy nightclub, he says, throwing the white shirts into a basket. Did you see any giraffes out there? Giraffes are the kibbutz members who are oblivious to the work being done under their feet. The supervisor shakes his head. Then let's get to work. The 2 men walk over to a large washing machine. With one pushing from behind and the other pulling from the front, the huge barrel swings to one side, revealing a man-sized hole beneath it. The supervisor waves his hand and motions to them. They have 3 minutes to get their group down the ladder. Her stomach tightens as she looks into the hole. Loud metallic banging overtakes the roar of the washers. Her mood darkens. She sighs and sticks the apple blossom behind her ear. Try to keep it alive, okay? Her supervisor says. She manages a thin smile, then hand over hand, makes her way down the ladder. When she reaches the bottom, she puts her earplugs in, looking up as the giant washer seals the hole. The long underground room is hot and cramped, the noise ear-splitting. She passes the machine that line the right-hand wall, each one operated by one of the 45 volunteers in her shift. Today, she's assigned to work on the far end of the room. She walks by the machines that press, stretch, trim, shape, wash, and pull the metal, each one a step in the bullet-making process. Like every day for the past year, this underground facility will produce thousands of bullets for the British-made Sten gun. Fittingly, these 9mm parabellums got their name from the Latin, "If you seek peace, prepare for war." 2 weeks ago, she was amazed by the secret munitions factory. Finally, she was supporting the war effort in a real way. For a week, she was happy, singing at the tops of her lungs like each worker did, following their own melodies together under the deafening noise of the machine. Then after a week, her mood shifted. This was not for her. She dreaded the metallic banging of the machines, hated the chemical smells and burning metal, hated the work that was ruining her fingertips. Would she still be able to play the piano? The lack of sunlight wore her down. She developed a newfound hatred for potatoes, the one thing she had to eat down in the dungeon, as she called it. The days were 12 hours of hell, with the assaultive noise of not only the machines, but the constant rat-tat-tat of the Sten guns firing in the underground testing range. Even though she stuffs her ears with a mix of wax and cotton wool, every night she falls asleep to the same incessant ringing. She pours gunpowder through a narrow funnel into the bullet casings, then tamps them. She pulls a box and moves it over to the next station, where the tips are put into place. From there, they are packed into bigger crates that line the far side of the workshop. A woman stands at a nearby table, painting stencils on the tops of the large wooden boxes that read "Fragile, handle with care, light bulbs." Sometime after a potato break, she never calls it lunch since it's all they have, no matter what, the foreman signals for her to follow him to the closet. Inside is a stool and a large light fixture. The foreman points and Shula sits. She sips her canteen as the man pulls the string, turning on the bulb. Ultraviolet light from the sunray lamp fills the tiny space. She leans back against the wall. 20 minutes, the foreman yells, and don't fall asleep. Shula looks at her watch and takes another sip of water. Her first week there, a girl fell asleep in the sunroom, as they call it. When they found her an hour later, only one side of her face had been exposed to the light, leaving half of her face bright red, the other half white. After that incident, the supervisor lectured them on the room's proper use. "We are trying to blend in and look like people who have been working in the sun all day, not like clowns in the circus," he admonished. She leans back her head against the wall and feels her face warm. Closing her eyes, she imagines the sun on her face, the smell of the trees, the light breeze on her skin. Fingering the apple blossom behind her ear, she takes it out and smells. No, there still isn't a smell, but at least the flower's alive. She puts a drop of water from the canteen on the tip of her finger and dips the stem in, then sticks it back behind her ear. She is hot. The air is stifling. The noise is deafening. And if she never sees another potato in her life, that would be a blessing.
So for that part of it, that you did some of the research at the museum, correct?
Is what?
Some of the research you did for that part of the book was at the museum in Israel?
Yes, yeah. So it basically is the factory. You go down, you walk through it, and it is a small, tight space. And they still have the bakery and the laundry and the clothesline. So, it was all there. It was really amazing.
And the sunroom, did they have sun?
They had sunroom. They have a little cutout of a woman standing there, but yeah, they have the sun. They have the room where they would go in and sit. Yeah, it's amazing.
And I think we all know that one person who's fallen asleep at the beach who has had that horrible sunburn where they have their face or have something has been cooked. So we do have more questions. So one of them is, did the process of writing about your mother give you more insight into her? And did your impression of her change in any way?
Yes, I mean, it had to. I feel like I got a better understanding of what her life was like. And, there were certain things that I found that I realized she had been through that I never even knew it, happened. One thing is, in chapter 4, there's a bombing in Tel Aviv, which is completely out of the blue. It's, they basically weren't touched by World War II in that place very much. And then this Italians just dropped their bombs all over her neighborhood in Tel Aviv, and this is central Tel Aviv. And at first I wasn't going to write about it because I didn't know anything about it. And then I thought, well, how can you not? I mean, that's a huge, over 100 people were killed, and then her neighbors, I mean, it must have affected her. So those things really, and just, I think I got a better understanding of her and, her brother and this wonderful relationship they had and this unusual family. I mean, they were part of my book is really about Tel Aviv and that city, and what a unique place it was and is. And my uncle was going to be an architect, and my mother was going to be a concert pianist. I mean, these were the intelligentsia. So yeah, definitely feel like I got to know her better.
Okay, so the next one, and this is sort of my same question I have too. They said they love the story, but I keep imagining her coming to New York. What happened, and will you write a sequel?
Yes, I actually started working on that last summer, and it's going to take place from when she gets to New York, so in the 1950 or 49-50, and probably go through the early 60s, I think. But yeah, I mean, she lived in New York. She worked, there's more tragedy because my mother, so she went to study. Her mother came to visit, I think after about 6 months. They were in a horrible car accident. Her mother was killed. She broke her arm. She stopped playing the piano. And then she ended up working at the Israel consulate in New York. So it's the first Israel consulate, and they were all these Israelis who had just come from the army, and suddenly they're in the diplomatic corps, and they had to go have lessons on how to wear gloves and which gloves to wear in the afternoon as opposed to the evening. I mean, it was very much a completely different world. I think she loved New York. I know that. She thought it was just the place for her.
So did Solomon come back into the picture, or is it a new love?
Solomon did not come back in the picture. And Solomon, I made Solomon up. But based on something that another friend of hers told me, just that feeling at that time where you wouldn't leave. You just, she lost all this stuff, and then someone wants her to leave. I mean, this woman who told me the story said, her fiance said, come to England with me. And she was like, are you crazy? I can't leave. Like, this is... So I was trying to, and also this whole notion, I mean, Solomon was a lot about the being Jewish, but not Israeli, and the difference. And then also the thing that happened where there were women who were tarred and feathered because they were dating, the enemy. So all those, he represented a lot of those things for me.
So the next one is, someone asked, how did you research the book?
All kinds of ways. I probably read, I had a little library of books that I went through, nonfiction, a lot of background on, what's interesting is a lot of the things I was researching, like fashion at the time, a lot of the texts, the academic books are just coming out in the last few years. So it was great. I had a lot that they're pretty new books. And then I watched a lot of films. I mean, this Steven Spielberg's archives of Jewish and Israeli film. I mean, that's where I got a lot of those really old clips. And that was just an amazing treasure trove to see what it was like. I mean, you can actually see. And my sister, I have a sister who lives in Israel, and she did write a nostalgia column for one of the English language papers for a long time. So she was a great resource for me as well. So in all ways. But,
well, no, and that's good because shopping is part of the book. I love when you go shopping for dresses.
Well, fashion, and that's what I think the dresses for me were like. What is, it was her costume, how she was going to present herself to the world, and it was very important. And what did that mean? And again, when you're a generation that's creating a style, there was a very specific style that my mother and her Israeli girlfriends wore. They wore certain things, and this heavy jewelry, and Moroccan and Yemenite, and thick eyeliner. It was they had a whole look.
Okay, so someone's asking, what were your research methods? Did you go to the libraries or other places in Israel for research? And what is most family interviews and anecdotes?
I did, like I said, I was there for about 2 weeks a few years ago, and that's when I did the bulk of the research, and that was interviewing. That was the bulk of the research in terms of family. Like, I went to visit family and friends, and I'd set up meetings in advance and went with pictures and got stories and got some letters. And but most of it, I would say, was library books. I mean, I use the library a lot because a lot of these academic books you can only get through interlibrary loans, and so it was a great resource for that. And then online, you can find so much stuff. So if I needed details about something about the British soldiers, there's a website, by the guys who were there, and they write it all out, and I can, you can find everything. So those are the basic ways I did it.
So someone's asking, how did you get started writing? Did you give up a job to spend time doing it, and what was the process to get published?
So I've been writing as my job. I was in PR for a long time. That's kind of where I worked. It was the opposite of journalism. Like, we would put together the stories and then hand them to the journalists and let them. So I've always written a lot, and I just wanted to do something that was more creative. And when I found this stuff, I thought, I had started writing little pieces about my mother, memories, some made up and some based on what I remembered about things. And I had this whole kind of jumble of personal essays, fiction, all those things. And I hired an editor, and we sat down, and she had me just put everything in order and talk about where it was going, and advised me to go on the historical fiction route, which I felt fine about because it was too hard. I couldn't get back to Israel to do actually on the ground research there. And I have been, I do freelance work, so I just made the time. It took a long time. I'm not going to lie, it's a lot of work, and no one's telling you to do it. And then the publishing process, I decided at some point, I think, I thrive on deadlines, and the thought of kind of shopping it and waiting and rewriting, just didn't want to do that when I, decided to publish. So I actually self-published through the KDP, and I don't know if I would do that again, but it was definitely, I'm proud of the book. The cover was done by a friend of mine in New Orleans who does books for covers, and she had been in Israel with me a long time ago. So, I'm just really happy with how it came out.
So someone asked, is the book available through the Marin County Library? And it is. So if you look it up in our catalog, you can find it. And we also have copies on order as well. I'm reading the library's copy, which will be added to our collection in the next couple of days. So someone also asked, how many years does the novel span?
So it starts in 1936, and I'm sorry, 1934, and Shula is 6th, and it goes through 1940, I think it ends in 49, and that's when she decides to leave and go pursue her musical career in the States. The beginning story when she was 6 was something that she told us had happened. For a short time, they had lived in Nazareth, and at the time, and this is when I was doing research, I found that it was an Arab city. There was maybe 70 Jewish families. I mean, it was and they had probably been there for years. So later there was an actual Jewish settlement that was built outside of the town. But the story was that she'd fallen into a well, and this Arab woman saved her. And to me, that was just a very representative as well about how her and her family lived when they were there, and why they were there, and how they lived. So I really felt that was a good story to tell.
Someone asked, how many years from the first idea to publication? So how long did it take you?
I think it took 6 years. Yeah. Well, I'm going to say that.
And then someone asked, how many times have you been to Israel, and do you still have family there?
Yeah, I have a lot of family. Both my father's side and my father was born in the States, grew up in the States, but his sister went and lived there, and he's got a lot of family. And my mother's family, obviously, and my older sister actually lives there. She moved there in the late 80s and has been there ever since. So I go back. I mean, when we were young, we used to go every year, and I try to get back every 2 or 3 years.
Okay. Someone asked, was there really a Nazi dragging at the Purim parade?
Yes, there was, and you can see the picture. You can find it online. I actually have it in my webinar that I've done with a slideshow. And that was 1934. So I think in the book I even say the year before they had a Hitler float, but they got complaints from the German representatives and the British mandate, so they changed it to this giant 3-headed Nazi monster. When I saw that, I just thought, oh my God, this is amazing. I have to incorporate that in.
Well, it also sort of incorporates the World War II into the book. So you know that there's this tension between, and when the war really starts, and when they're bombed by kids. That part of the book was when they get bombed, when she's in the bedroom with her mom, putting the baby to bed, or to give a bath, was just like totally out of the blue. And that's really how, when you get bombed, that's what happens. No one's expecting it. And like I said, there was no warning. But it's a well-written and really riveting part of the story, too. And there's so many of those in the book. That's what I really loved about it. So.
Thank you. Actually, almost didn't write about that, but someone read, I referenced it. Oh, that bombing that happened, and they looked at me, you can't just say it happened. You have to tell your dad it's huge. And I was like, really? Okay. So we went that chapter, rewritten. Yes. No, but I think it came out well, and it also just how world events can affect you even when it's not in your area. They were bombing because it was held by the British. But the Italians were actually in Ethiopia. I mean, it was just all World War.
Mm-hmm. Someone asked, are you working on a second novel?
I'm actually working on another book. I took a break, and I'm kind of a third of the way through of another book, but I might stop and go back to this. We'll have to see. Well,
I hope so. I really want to know what happened in New York. So.
I do too. And to me, that's very exciting. It was the 50s in New York, and she was at music school for a while, and it must have, just for someone who had come in New York, which was filled with culture and all this stuff, and it must have been just mind-blowing. And then to be, I'm sure, because they were the consulate and they were in New York, they probably had a lot of fancy parties, and Leonard Bernstein will come back. So.
Yeah, there's if you haven't read this book, you've got to read it. There's so many great things in this book. I am myself, I'm looking forward to the sequel. But what are you working on? So you were working on another book. What is this book about?
This book is something I started a long time ago, and I think I just needed a break from this. So this takes place in New York in 1971 in the music business. So that's all I'm going to tell you right now, Franklin.
Well, no, we'll look forward for that one too. So I can't wait to read it. And don't worry, I know it takes writers a few years to write because you have other things to do as well. And now that you have 2 book projects you're working on, you're going to probably go back and forth between them. So, does anybody else have any more questions? So. You can see if anything else comes back in, but I just recommend to everybody, if you haven't read this book, read it. It's a really great read. I mean, like I said, it really does, for me, it was a good eye-opener for the history of Israel. Something like when I first started reading, I had no idea about the British mandate. But then when I started to think about what happened after World War I, there's it used to be part of the Ottoman Empire, and there's like that one mention of the Ottoman building being blown up that people forget what happened after World War I and how the world was carved up between great nations. Someone's asking, where can they buy the book?
You can buy the book on Amazon, and I'm going to be putting it through Ingram Sparks soon, so it'll be available in local bookstores as well. So hopefully in the next month, I'll get that going.
And then, did you schedule your writing? Someone's asking.
Scheduled my writing and also did some writing retreats, and that's really where I got the bulk of the writing done. I think it's, when you're a mom and all this other stuff's going on, it's hard to not get interrupted. And so that was where I would do the bulk of my writing, is take 4 days, go somewhere, just write. And hoping to do that again soon. Because I find it for me, that works the best. I do a lot of my research and kind of planning and then go away and do the writing.
That's good. Is still music part of your family's life, or has it passed on?
No, I mean, I worked in, I didn't play music. I think that part was, I'm sure I can analyze that for several sessions. But I worked in music starting when I was 16 in Boston, and I worked in radio stations, and then I came out here and I worked in concert production, Bill Brown Presents, at the Fillmore in the Warfield, and so yes, music has always been, I like being around it. And I think I grew up, my mother was always performing. We would have, whenever we went to dinner, she'd bring her guitar and sing. And so, seeing what music does and how important it was something I've carried with me, for sure.
So someone's asking, how did you come to Marin?
How did I come to Marin? Well, I came to San Francisco when I left Boston after I graduated from college. I was wanting to go to New York or San Francisco, and New York seemed it was too intimidating at that point. And San Francisco was cheap back then, and I had friends here. And so I came out and just made my home, and then moved out to Marin after I got married. And been back and forth, and we went to London, and there's been a lot of moving.
Well, I'm glad you're here. This has been good. So I don't see any more questions coming in, so our hour's almost up. So I really want to thank you for being here, Rina. Again, like I said, I really did love this book. I enjoyed it. I love the music in it. I think only one QR code wasn't working anymore.
Yes, I just updated it. It's gone.
But I did love that. It was something that even if you know music, you might remember this piece, but I loved that it was able to go in and listen to it while you're reading. So that was one thing.
There's the Rachmaninoff piece she puts on when it's a morning piece. And when I played it, I was kind of going through pieces, and it just is such a sad piece of music. I mean, it's so heavy, and that's what I really felt like, I want people to be able to hear it, because describing it does not, you hear that piece and you're like, whoa, this was someone who was mourning. So yes, I'm glad you were able to.
And I think that's why it was great to have the soundtrack to the book. I mean, when Shula finds music, we find it with her, and it sort of we get to go along with her process. That's why I'm also looking forward to the next one. What did she do in New York? What song did she play? That'll be the next one. So, the book didn't come with the CD. Inside the book, it's really I've not seen this very often, but inside the book, she puts these little QR codes in, and you just get a little app on your phone and you can scan it. And so there wasn't a CD in it, so you just sort of paused it and played music, and it would take you to the YouTube videos. And what I would do is just set my phone down and go back to reading. The only parts where I really stopped to listen was the speech and the UN thing, because the UN one was a pretty long one, but it was still it's a moment in history that they caught on in film, and this is a great way to share it. And I think for a lot of us who don't know the history of Israel, it's a great way to learn that history. And I think there's even the elements of the conflicts that have been happening ever since the birth of Israel are in the book as well. People that
yeah. And I wanted to show that because it is complicated. Sure. Yeah.
So, well, it's kind of the end of our hour, everybody. So I want to thank Rina for being here again, for sharing us with this book. And I'm looking forward to the sequel and the next book. So I can't wait to see what you write next. And when those come out, we'll have you back, and hopefully we'll be in person, so everybody will get to see it. But yeah, go out and you can find our book at Amazon. And like I said, we do have it in the Marin Net collection, and we're adding copies to Larkspur, so you'll be able to get it to read it. But it's a great book, and I'm just really happy that you sent it to me and I got to read it. So it was really awesome. So and I'm glad you're here. And I thank everybody for joining this afternoon. And again, I apologize for my sound issues, but hopefully it's been better. But it's new technology, and I need to get a better microphone that I have to sit right in front of me so we don't have this again. So thank you for joining us, everybody, and we'll see you guys next time. And thank you again, Rina. Thank you.
Thank you, Franklin.
You guys all have a great afternoon. I'll see you soon.
Okay. All right.
Bye.
Bye.